Welcome to SJ Talks. This is Krishna with another new leadership podcast series. Today we are joined by Mr. Ravi Chandra Kota, a seasoned chief financial officer with over 2 decades of experience. From India to Africa, Europe, and North America, his journey reflects leadership in finance transformation, governance, and strategy, driving growth and resilience across diverse industry. Let's welcome Mr. Ravi Chandra Kota on SJ Talks today. Thank you so much sir, for being on the show.
Thank you for having me.
Mr. Ravi, you have worked across countries and different sectors, right? So, from Bank of America to WHO to ICRISAT, was there a moment in your career that's probably it's early in your career where you realized this path is going to be very different from the usual financial journey?
Sure. So Krishna, if I were to kind of take a step back and go, into the past, so I did my articles training from Carvey and Company, and that was more like a foundation stone for me, wherein I actually saw my seniors getting into ERP consulting. When they passed out their CA, and that was a very interesting choice they made in those days when ERP was still, getting evolved. And when I actually qualified as a CA way back in 2003, for me, I had numerous choices. I could get into manufacturing, I could get into the core finance jobs, or get into industrial training. But then I happened to come across an opportunity with Satyam Computers in their ERP consulting space. And so basically would not be, it will not be like a day job where I will, look at books of accounts, get into audits, getting into accounts finalization and so on. It was all about implementing systems, and at the core of it was the finance and the operations knowledge, where you have to understand the financial architecture structure, and then design systems for them. That's when I realized that I'm taking a very different path. And obviously after I joined Satyam, I got opportunity to travel to Singapore for my first project, on-site project, which was with Ministry of Education. So this is a government department of Singapore, and I was sitting out of their office, and I was implementing Oracle for them. And that is when I realized that, while I have the CA qualification, I come from a finance background, but I'm actually doing something which is way beyond finance, where I'm not just limiting myself to just finance or the finance architecture, but even looking beyond finance, where I'm trying to understand how will translate benefits to the organization in terms of the core operations, right? And that followed through. Where later on, when I transitioned to WHO project, which was a multi-million-dollar project, I was in Geneva, in WHO headquarters, sitting closely with the planning and program management team. And that's when I realized that whatever we are doing today is going to have ramifications for the future. So this is going to be a strategic response to the problems that they're facing. So it was not like a pure, stereotypical finance role. And this realization came early on. So, and that has stuck to me even till today, even after 20 years.
Okay. That looks like that's a powerful reflection of that.
Yes, yes.
Good, sir. So, securing, probably that's where I heard that like you have secured all India 25th rank in your chartered accountancy. And that's a remarkable one. So, what discipline or it could be the mindset that helped you to achieve that?
Sure. Thank you. So, when I started my CA course, I did that after graduation. So it was like an afterthought rather than people who actually get into foundation and then, they get through the inter and then the final. So for me, I never set out to achieve any rank. I just wanted to qualify, get the experience from my articles training with Carvey and Company, and solid. We went through solid training because most of the time we were, away from Hyderabad. We were at client sites. I got an opportunity to be, auditing for cement, manufacturing, shrimp processing, and a host of other companies. So this actually gave a lot of foundation in terms of finance and audit, and the way forward. And of course, the rank happened only because of the discipline and the sincerity with which you approach. But then your practical knowledge also helps to a large extent for papers like auditing, costing, where you can bank on your practical experience. For me, I think I would say people look at the rank, which is the glamorous part, but underneath it is a lot of silence, a lot of moments where you're actually doubtful about yourself, where you have to go through the pain. There will be like a lot of people giving a lot of advices, but you have to stick to what you believe in, and you have to stick to the fact that you can achieve it. Because I've actually, interesting thing is, when I actually appeared for my exam first time in CA intermediate, I was sitting next to an old man, and I thought this old man is actually a guardian to one of the students who is appearing the exam. But I was shocked to hear from him that he's actually come to appear for the exam, and he spent close to 20-25 years pursuing that, and he still had that determination to kind of crack it. And that was very inspirational. Of course, it was scary at first, but it also inspirational that this course, CA course, is actually a way of life. It kind of defines how you conduct your life, how do you conduct yourselves. So it was a great experience, and I'm happy that I was able to secure that.
That's really interesting, and discipline is clearly
Yes,
visible.
discipline is the key. Yes.
That's good to know. That's it. Mr. Ravi, you have handled financial accounts, and it's like ranging from corporate to non-profit organizations. Can you share kind of a situation where the success itself changed from these, like where you were working, such, which I mean to say that was corporate and as well as non-profit organizations?
Right. No, that's a great question. So basically, the parameters are different. For corporate, it's usually, I'm not saying it's the only parameter, but usually it's the bottom line. How to increase the top line, how to increase the bottom line, try to bring in cost efficiencies, try to reduce or at least eliminate the redundancies, right? And of course, maximize the returns to the shareholders or to the promoters. But for a not for profit, and especially those which are in the international domain, the key parameter is not how much you have kind of earned, but the key parameter is whether you have kind of restored the trust and faith of the donor or the funder. You're mobilizing money for a cause, so you have to kind of give that trust or to the donor or the funder. Second is that the money that you have mobilized, has it been used purposefully, rightfully, and has it actually reached the beneficiaries? So when you be it WHO or HelpAge or ICRISAT, these are all purpose driven organizations, right? So the key parameter is, have you facilitated or accelerated the flow of money to the end outcomes. So that's the key difference. And a lot of CFOs I have seen who've kind of transitioned from corporate to not-for-profit world or to international development world, and they have struggled because they apply the same set of parameters or yardsticks that they otherwise apply to a corporate world, but they will not be able to get the consensus internally. In a for-profit world, usually it's the decisions which drive people, right? But in not-for-profit or international domain, it's the consensus which drives, where things, you can't be very agile. You have to be very thoughtful about the decisions you make, but you need to build consensus and you need to drive. So it's a very carefully curated kind of an approach that you will have to follow in a not-for-profit world.
That's a great point. So success really does look different.
Yes, success, the way you measure success is relatively different. You cannot apply the same set of rules in both the domains.
Right. That's insightful, sir. Mr. Ravi, this was a question being framed by one of my known persons, so I'll just read out for you, sir.
Sure.
There's a mention of navigating a complex financial situation at ICRISAT, that's where you worked. What was the first signal that things were not under control? This was by my known person, which I shared across your resume.
Mm-hmm.
So he wants, on his behalf, I'm just asking this question for you, sir.
Sure. So, Krishna, I would be little cautious in terms of this response, because obviously we are talking about an organization, right? So I can only speak as much what is available in the public domain. So of course, I had a long stint with ICRISAT. It's an international organization, and this particular aspect that you're hinting at was an issue with not upgrading their systems for like 15 years. Prone to a lot of internal control framework failures, donor confidence being dented. So I had to pull up the socks. I had to kind of completely overhaul the systems, processes, bring in huge change management exercise and transformation exercises to kind of get the organization back on track, so that we can focus on the core outcomes and also get the support, regain the support from the donors and the funders. But of course I cannot get into the details because it will not be fair on my part. But yeah, it required a lot of effort, a lot of thought, and conviction to be able to kind of lead the organization during that crisis period. And of course it does have a mention in the respective years annual reports and financial statements, but I think whoever is interested, they can go back and see those. I would not be kind of candid enough to share the information in this.
That's a important observation which you have done it. So coming to the next question, so you managed a $50 million target research, the treasury and research budgets, right? So was there a moment where one decision of yours could have gone either way, significantly changed the outcomes which you did not expect that?
So that happens irrespective of the value of the the quantum that you manage. So even at Bank of America, I did manage millions of dollars of budget, and same holds for ICRISAT, even the other organizations that I work for. But I think the point to remember is that we actually compartmentalize it, right? We don't, you actually don't carry out a single transaction. You actually carry out hundreds of transactions, and you have to rely on your judgment. And when they, at senior roles, when they appoint you, I've always believed that they appoint you, of course, for the pedigree, for the experience that you bring in, for the skill sets. But I believe they also hire you for your ability to kind of judge and quickly act, and how agile are you. So yes, when I was managing treasury size of $50 million, or the annual budgets of $70 million or $80 million, or when I was raising funds, in the past organizations, I think I'll always believe the conviction. The conviction is that you have to think through, get your act together, and you have to just, be agile and then act on it. There will never be a perfect moment when everything will align in your favor. You kind of, lay out the pluses, minuses, the pros and cons, the options, and you choose an option. You mitigate all the risks to the extent you can, and then at least you're going ahead, but you know that there are chances of this going either way, but you know the risk. Like I use this example quite a lot when I'm actually making presentations to the senior management or to the board. I always speak about known knowns. So this stuff, right? Then you have known unknowns. So something will go wrong, but you're not exactly sure. You can map out a particular scenario or a range where it could go wrong. So these are known unknowns. So you operate with known knowns and known unknowns. And of course, nobody can do anything about unknown unknowns, right? Because that is like, completely out of your thinking. But yeah, that is how I've always approached. And the only point is, more than the quantum, I think I look at the complexity. So when I'm making a decision, I look at the complexity. How is it going to impact the organization as a whole? Basically the consequences. And then, you take a judgment call based on your experience, skill sets. You can draw back on a lot of information that is available, and then you act on it. Sometimes organizations fail, or they kind of, don't succeed in the way that they want to, because of indecisiveness. And I've seen that in my career as well, where I've seen leaders who actually don't act, they don't take decisions because they don't want to fail. And that is the bigger dent to the organization than actually taking an action and maybe slightly going sideways. So yeah.
I believe that's one decision at that scale that truly changes the outcomes, right? Sir?
Yes, it does. It does. So you have to be mindful of that, and then you have to play out your strategies, and you have to go with a conviction.
Right. As you mentioned in our the first conversation, so you've been working with Satyam Computers. That's you were also
Yes.
been implementing the ERP implementations,
Yes.
right? So across, and apart from this, also I believe you implemented it
all
across
through my
some global
career, yes.
organizations, also,
Yes.
right?
Yes.
So, can you describe a particular moment where technology alone wasn't enough, and people became the real challenge?
Okay. So interestingly, technology will never be enough. Technology can only bring you a system or a tool or a solution, but then it is always the people, as I said in the earlier conversation as well. So it is people first, then process, then technology. If you're not working with people, no matter how good the product is, how good the solution is, it will not fly. It will never get you the required benefits, because it's the people. So I'll tell you a peculiar example that happened. I'll not name the organization for obvious reasons. So I was actually leading a large transformation project, which is going to completely overhaul the organization in terms of how we run the processes, how we run finance, operations, all put together. I'm not just limiting it to finance. So I had 3 staff members who walked into my cabin, and then they said, can you push it to another 2 to 3 years? So I was curious to know why. And they said, it's only because we want to retire. We'll retire in the next 1 year, 2 years. So you can then bring out this change exercise, and then we'll be gone. So we are kind of okay. So, to their own surprise, I actually made them the change champions. I said, you guys have so much of domain experience, the institutional memory, the wisdom, which is very difficult for a new person to just come in and then, gain all this at one go. So I made them change champions. I made them lead the transformation initiative. So actually, they were the ones who were actually playing a very key role when we were actually doing the requirements gathering or trying to work out the future design or even designing the solution. And they were the ones who were even leading the fellow peers and the other staff members in the testing environment, trying to see if the solution or the workarounds that have been designed are fit for purpose, they're working for their intended purpose or not. So that is how I kind of approach. So it's always with people, and it has nothing to do with technology, any initiative for that matter. If you're not getting the people on your side, if you don't have the buy-in from the people, and when you say people, I'm not necessarily talking about the board or the senior management, you actually have to get the support from the ground up, and that is when you can actually, succeed in that initiative.
I like that example which you gave me.
Yes.
But technology is vital, but people make, I could say, often make break, or they can change it, right?
Correct. The usual resistance is because they are not informed, right, of the benefits. So when you're informed about the benefits of any initiative, be it technology driven or otherwise, I don't think the resistance will be much. It's usually we don't attend to that resistance. We see that as a problem, but we don't want to get into the root of the problem. The root of the problem is simply they want to understand, will their jobs be impacted? Will their roles be impacted? Will the comfort that they have gained over the last few years or decades of doing a particular thing in a particular manner, will they lose that comfort? They also have this fear of losing control over the process, right? Because they have been doing it for so many years. Once we address this as part of the change management exercise, I think all this gets sorted out, and they are the ones who will actually be a biggest supporter of your initiative. I've always approached, so I've kind of led transformation projects beyond Satyam. So in all the organizations that I've kind of worked, and I've always ensured that for any transformation initiative, I actually conduct workshops with the people. I get them on board. I try to address their fears, the questions, concerns that they have, and then you kind of go ahead. you accelerate, and then you have the people's support. So there's nothing that's going to stop you.
Mr. Ravi, you have interacted with boards, the
Yes.
global leaders, and institutions. What's something about boardroom conversations that most professionals completely misunderstood?
So I'm really not sure if this is largely misunderstood, but I understand the question that you're asking me. So one of the and this is a work personality that I've seen. So one of the earliest experiences that I've had was at WHO when I was in Geneva, and I was fortunate to kind of see in person Mr. Kofi Annan, who was the United Nations Secretary General, and coincidentally he was born. I think he was brought up in Geneva. He studied in Geneva, the city where I was working at that point in time, and he addressed the large gathering of WHO. And it was such an inspirational speech because it was about an immigrant who had come there, who had worked so hard in his life, and he's gone to that level, of authority. And coming to the second part of your question, like the board meetings, right? So if somebody were to ask me, how do we approach? We have a board meeting coming up, and this is going to be our first presentation to the board, ever in our life. So how do we approach? My answer would be very simple. My answer would be to kind of, not just focus on the board meeting or on the agenda, but try to look at the composition of the board, So you will have people drawn from different functions, different geographies, different regions, different portfolios, So between them, they have a lot of experience, a lot of wisdom, a lot of skill sets that they come up with. And of course, with a common purpose. They want to serve the organization, they want to do good to the organization. My advice or suggestion would be to kind of reach out to them before the board meeting, during the board meeting, and even after the board meeting, because most of the interesting conversations or the thought-provoking conversations actually happen prior to the board meeting, or during the board meeting when you're done with the agenda items and you're kind of you've gone into an informal mode, or even after the board meeting when you kind of have the closure meeting, and then you're just circling to share some perspectives, and that is where the real learning happens. And there you can understand and gain from their insights what they mean for the organization and so on. So that is how you kind of approach. And the primary important thing is be transparent in what you do. When you're even making the presentations, don't focus only on the numbers, but also try to build the narrative behind the numbers. So I'm presenting the financial statements, or I'm presenting an initiative in terms of the cost, the benefits that will accrue. You also need to make an effort to kind of give them in a non-financial language the narrative, the story behind the numbers, so that they understand, because they are looking at a strategic response to the questions. They're not looking at a very technical response to the questions that they're asking. So this is how I've approached. I'll also suggest, those who are kind of, going to go for their first board meeting to use the same approach. It helps.
That's a valuable insight. Mostly the boardrooms,
Yes.
the kind of conversations, they are felt almost misunderstood from outside.
Yes. It almost feels like a war room, and you feel like, you get so nervous and tensed, but it could happen the other way also. So there was this particular board meeting where I actually went with a lot of information, data. I even kind of preempted some of their questions. I actually thought through that, they may get into this tangent, so let me prepare those cuts. And of course, the narrative, the story, everything intact. But then when I went there, the particular board meeting actually turned out to be otherwise. There were like a lot of insights. They were actually probing themselves within the group, how we can help the institute. So it was not about the presentations that we are making, but is also collectively trying to understand, the way forward, the future outlook. So it can always be a surprising, it can full of surprises which you can't even anticipate.
Thank you, Ravi. So moving as further, so you were moving from corporate roles, from CFO in the corporate setups to not for profits, right? So, did you ever like have to unlearn something where early you were successful?
Well, you always have to unlearn and learn and relearn. Refresh your memory, because the lot of I always believe that anyone anyone, and it's not limited to someone from finance domain or CFO, anyone for that matter, we always have skill sets which are fungible, which are transferable. So you can always gain skills from your education, from your degrees, from an organization, right? And you can apply some of these learnings to another organization. But you have to contextualize. You cannot just copy and paste. You just can't replicate things that you have done in the past. You have to think through, contextualize, understand the background, understand the structure, the culture, organizational ethos, and then see where these fit within the given ambit of the scope that you have. So yeah, always been relearning, learning, unlearning. Of course, you never want to imbibe or acquire skills where you come across people who are loud, who believe that if you are kind of being very loud, if you are being very vocal with your teams or with your peers, you can get things done quickly. So those skill sets never help. So basically, you can always be yourself, be your original self, and apply the learnings that you have learned elsewhere, and then try to get the maximum leverage.
That's a good reflection. Unlearning is something.
Yes.
It's a harder than learning.
Yes.
But it's essential for growth
Yes.
also.
The best part is you always approach any new task or assignment with the fact that that I don't know anything. Now let me see. So you have a task on hand, and there are these skill sets or information that you require. But when you're looking at it, try to approach it with the mindset that that I don't know anything. Now let me map what do I have, and then what is it that I require. So when you go back to the drawing board and and you try to assess this, you will be able to set your ego aside, and you'll be able to kind of focus completely on the task and the project on hand. So that's the approach I've always followed.
Probably, I just want to give you a small scenario.
Sure.
If someone spent a week on you watching your work, right? What's one moment that would really surprise them, sir?
I think they'll struggle to even structure me and slot me, because if you look at my career, I've the kind of transitions that I've done. It's not very routine or regular that you would see, from getting into CA, and then immediately transitioning into ERP consulting. And then from ERP consulting, I moved to UN, where I joined WHO. I was posted in Congo as a budget and finance officer. I had a UN passport. I actually had the perks of UN life. And then from a job in UN to immediately, resigning that and coming to pursue a management degree. Nobody would make that transition. Nobody would take that decision. So, and then, going through that 1 year of rigor, where I, did my master's in leadership and strategy from ISB. And then again, getting into Bank of America, which is a hardcore finance job. I was into financial planning and analysis. And then again, made transition back to international development. So these, I think, require a lot of adaptability, conviction, more than anything, conviction that yes, you can excel in whatever domains that you get in. So like my previous organizations that I worked for, they were in for profit, and they were in a space that I've never worked before. So I worked for a carbon technology company. I knew nothing about carbon technology. But then I knew for a fact that there were a lot of skill sets that I acquired, experience that I have, where I'll be able to leverage, and also learn. So with that mindset, I think I was able to make these transitions. So if somebody were to kind of, shadow me for a week, two things can happen. Either they will be completely influenced. They will also, try to explore that yes, we can also kind of, do these transitions, the transitions that suit them, or they may see me as someone who's completely outlier, so he's not even in the mean, he's somewhere outlier. So those are the probably the two expressions that they will make after
Okay.
that shadowing period.
And that's interesting, sir. Those behind the scenes really
Yes.
show the reality of your
Yes.
leadership. So, Mr. Ravi, so thank you so much for sharing your inputs, the insights all about the financial related. Mr. Ravi, like after all, like the strategy, numbers, and your and global exposure, right? What's something very simple today that gives you sense of clarity or reset?
Clarity or reset. Okay. So I think I always make it a point to rise early in the morning. So I'm an early morning person, irrespective of the organizations that I work for, because they will have their own routines, right, in terms of when they start work and all that stuff. So I wake up quite early in the morning. I need to have my morning coffee because that is the moment when I actually get into reflection. Try to see, and every day when I wake up, of course, it's a new start, right? So I am actually grateful for the fact that I'm able to live another day, and and then reflect on the past, think about not past as in not like the past, but just the day before. Try to understand if there were things that I know I could take stock of, or reset, do any course correction. So that's a very important aspect that I hold to, including if possible go for a morning walk, because that kind of gets you into introspection. So yeah, these are some things which are like non-negotiables for me. Even when I'm traveling, I kind of ensure that I follow this routine to the extent possible.
And that's refreshing, sir. That's looks like simple habits often bring the most clarity.
Yes. So I don't know if you had the opportunity to go through my LinkedIn profile as well. So I generally, I do post on LinkedIn, but these are centered around the, the daily aspects. So one of my posts was a reflection on the filter coffee. So basically, I'm a lover of coffee, and then of course, filter coffee is what I enjoy. So this was about filter coffee, and the analogy that I was trying to draw in my post, rather, which I can briefly mention, is that when you go for coffee, there are different types of coffee, right? So it also depends on the person. So for me, filter coffee is a reflection of patience, because you have to wait for the decoction, right? And filter coffee actually requires you to be calm, composed. So it's not something which is like a quick thing to do. So that is something that I've also followed in my work routine. So sometimes I see people getting worked up, getting really vocal, getting startled, or for a very simple matter, something that can be sorted. So I try to go with composure, with a calm mind, and try to see the end to end, like what is the issue, how can we diagnose it, can we get to the root, and then solve it. So so that is what the philosophy I was trying to um, pass on with that particular post on LinkedIn.
Thank you so much, sir, for sharing your evening this over our SJ Talks podcast, specifically that we are focusing on the leadership podcast. So I really appreciate taking your time, coming down, and sharing your experience here, sir. Thank you so much.
No, thank you, Krishna. I think it was a great conversation. I thoroughly enjoyed the conversation, the kind of questions you have posted to me, because it also kind of helps me, again, do a reflection as we speak. So while I'm addressing, responding to the questions, I'm also trying to reflect. Is there something else, finer nuance that I've missed? That I can, apply again in my next, role. So I thoroughly enjoyed the conversation, and thank you.